I am Brad Keelor. He is Nick Hudyma. Next up on Director's Cut, find out where Wile E. Coyote exists in his sphere and why he is his hero.
Measure me in metered lines in one decisive stare. The time it takes to get
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Director's Cut. My name is Brad Keelor. I'm the director of the Geo-Institute, and that is why we call this show Director's Cut. Every week, I sit down with a different guest, a different GI member, who tells us all kinds of stories about their lives. Some of them are personal, some are professional, all of them are fun. This week, you will notice many things about what's happening on Director's Cut. One is that I am back in my house. We are back from Geo-Congress. Thanks to everyone who made it such a great comeback of sorts. We were happy to see so many people in Charlotte. We were happy to see your entire face and to see you in person and to know in some cases that you were a real person and not just a bot who was commenting on these videos that we post every so often. You will also notice that I am celebrating Michigan's return to the Frozen Four, which they will be playing Denver. When this airs, I believe it will be tomorrow that they will be taking on Denver for a trip to the national championship game in hockey. We will be talking a little bit about hockey in today's interview, which we will get to in just a moment. And if you like what you're going to see, and I think you will, you should click subscribe, you should click get notifications, and you will be notified every time we post something to our YouTube channel. This hockey-loving individual that we have on the other end of the chat today is the department chair of civil engineering at Boise State University, that of the blue field in Boise, Idaho. It is Nick Hudyma, who is also the chair of our technical coordination council within GI. So he's a huge star. Nick, thank you for doing this today.
Brad, thank you. I don't know if I'm a huge star or not, but I'm willing to help out however I can.
Oh, I like that. A positive attitude will get you far in life. And so, as always, we have 10 questions. 2 of them are the same that we ask everybody, and we always begin with one of those. Describe your job in 45 seconds.
My job, meetings, in person, Zoom, scheduled, unscheduled, impromptu. I do meetings. I'm a part-time autographer because everyone needs my signature. Part-time complaints department, part-time therapist, part-time cheerleader, and wannabe visionary. 45?
You know, being a wannabe visionary, I think, is better than not wanting to be a visionary. So, you know, you're halfway there, right?
Nice. Yeah.
That's not bad. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the structure of your department at Boise State later on in the interview here, and we'll learn a little bit more or a lot more about the civil department at Boise State. But we have to ask fun questions on Director's Cut, and that's where we turn next. And so the first one is it's a two-parter. Do you prefer homemade or store-bought cookies? And then beyond that, what is your favorite cookie?
Ooh, tough hitting journalism here, Brad. My cookie, store-bought cookies.
Oh,
right. Oh, yes.
Controversial.
But not grocery store cookies. I'm full into artisanal cookies, right? Find a bakery, get the cookies. Now, this is important. They have to be soft cookies. None of this snap, crackle. No. That's a cracker, right? If I want a cracker, I'll get some cheese and sausage and put it on my cracker. But, and I don't know if there's any fans that like this out there, slightly underbaked cookies, so they're like really gooey. Those are the ones that I really love. And my favorite, the snickerdoodle. Can't go wrong.
Wow.
right? Cinnamon, sugar. Yeah.
That's a good choice, and I'm with you on the slightly underbaked. We usually don't do it with our cookies, though, but we do it with brownies, so that you have that center part that's just cooked
Yes.
enough that it holds together and you can slice it, but it's got kind of that gooey filling in it. So,
Oh, definitely.
do you have a favorite bakery in Boise yet?
I can't even remember the name. That's how bad it is.
You
I
will
know where
send
you're
it to me
located.
and we will put it in the show notes so that when
Awesome.
people visit Boise, they can go patronize this said bakery. That's great. And I love that you went with the store-bought ones there because I feel like 90 out of 100 people are going to go homemade. So that was excellent. Stirring controversy right from the beginning on Director's Cut. The next question is always the research question. And here I wanted to ask something about imaging, maybe specifically remote sensing, I guess. I'm kind of the age that when I got out of college in 2001 and I read my first book on remote sensing, I think it was in 2004, my first academic book on remote sensing in 2004. And I was fascinated by this. And at the time, imaging data wasn't all that great and it wasn't all that widely available and the applications were pretty limited. As somebody who's seen this all the way through now, I mean, what's the most exciting thing to you about imaging, about remote sensing, and the way that you get to use it in your work?
So that's an interesting question. So for me, I'm a laboratory person, right? I like to work in the laboratory. And so my remote sensing and my imaging is very kind of close up. And, I started this, well, a long time ago. We won't mention how long ago. But I was working on a project that was sponsored by a consortium of oil companies. And they wanted to understand how these layered reservoir systems deformed when they were faulted. And so I made this little system that sheared some soils that had layers of sand and clay in different geometries. But I cut a window into this little shear apparatus so I could record on analog tape, right? Well before. And so I had all of these videos of these faults forming in layered systems. And so that's how I got into imaging. And then from there it was, let's do some photogrammetry because I'm working with these macroporous rocks that have, big voids in them. And so I wanted to try and quantify, how much void space there was on the surface because, well, I didn't have access to a CT scanner. I was able to convince a medical doctor that, hey, this was kind of cool, and maybe you should let me in, like before your patients come in, and scan some rocks for me. And they were able to do that. And so yeah, I just kind of carried on. I had a student who was very interested in drones, and I said, well, let's get some drones and let's do whatever you want. So I guess I've kind of come full circle, maybe not full circle, but expanded out of the laboratory into the remote sensing.
So what was that like in those earlier days then? You gave the example of having to ask the medical doctor to use their equipment. I mean, I would imagine on campus that it was even more challenging because you couldn't always find what you wanted to use. And this is the type of thing that is sort of facilities intensive. How have you seen that change over the years, and what did it take in order for that to happen? Because at some point, somebody in administration somewhere has to say, this is a big deal, and this is a must-have rather than a nice-to-have. Where do you think that swing was for the institutions that you were doing work at?
I really think it was when technology is starting to catch up with what we want to do. Right. And as technology starts to catch up, things become less and less expensive. And we're able to purchase these not so much state of the art, but kind of this is what you should have in your laboratory tools. And so I still don't have a CT scanner. So if anyone wants to give me a CT scanner out there in the geo world, or maybe let me use a CT scanner, that would be great.
Other than just driving down to your local doctor's office and availing yourself of the technology.
But you also have to convince them, right? Here's some crazy university professor that wants to do something, and
and isn't going to damage the equipment. I guess maybe that's the first the first thing you got to get through. Next question we have to ask here. I had kind of a very specific place that I wanted to go with this question, and you knew what it was, but you went one step farther, Nick Hudyma, and made this a two-parter. Other than family members, who was your first hero?
All right. So I've got two heroes. Growing up, my hero was Bobby Clark from the Philadelphia Flyers. And I know, all those hockey fans out there, I'm going to take a little bit of heat from this, right? Because everyone likes to hate the Flyers, right? We're everyone's arch enemy. But Bobby Clark was from a small town in Manitoba. And growing up, the Winnipeg Free Press always carried stories about the Philadelphia Flyers and this kid from Flin Flon, Manitoba. And I was like, hey, I'm from a small town in Manitoba. This means I can do something cool too. And so he was my hero. My dad always hated the Philadelphia Flyers. He was like, they're goons. They don't know how to play hockey. They're just too rough. And so probably that helped me like the Flyers a bit more, right? So there was some controversy in the family. But professionally, my hero is, well, he's not even a real person, right? But this character is an amazing innovator. He's an outstanding engineer. He's got great ideas, and he never gives up. And so throughout my career, I've tried to model myself after him. This guy, his name is Wile E. Coyote.
So I like that. And that was totally unexpected when we were talking about this before the interview started. So you've memorialized Wile E. Coyote in some way here. You have to tell everybody about that.
Certainly. He's so important to me that I guess I can show that. He's right here. Yeah, I've got a tattoo of Wile E. Coyote on my shoulder to remind me to be optimistic and try cool things, try crazy things. And if you don't succeed, you know what? It's okay. And
so when you got that tattoo, did you have to explain it? Did you explain it at the time to the artist, or did you just let him go and they didn't really care?
He didn't really care. He probably like, there's some weirdo coming in for a Wile E. Coyote tattoo.
Another Looney Tunes guy.
Exactly. But you know what? I've been very fortunate that I've been at universities where I could try different things. Right? I didn't have the pressure of these R1 universities that have to bring in all sorts of money. So I could try crazy things, and if it worked out, you know what? My students and we'd have a lot of fun trying. So,
which I think there's a lot to that. When in my days of organizing workshops and trying to put all these collaborations together, it was primarily internationally. We always looked for a good mix of people from the large research institutions and people from small ones where it was a big deal if you were bringing in any sponsored research at all. Because in those places, there was a lot of freedom for people to do whatever they wanted. The administration, in a lot of cases, was just happy to have that grant coming in. They didn't really care, and they wanted to get on the map somehow. And it wasn't about, how many PhD students you had and on and on and on. So I think that's really exciting. And your boss, actually, at Boise State, Joanne Leidy from NSF, I feel like shares this belief too. And so So you're right. You've been in amazing places for that. Can you think of a good example from a colleague or maybe somebody from another institution that you feel like they wouldn't have been able to do that work? Or this could be for yourself too. If you had been at an, sorry to name names here, but at an Illinois or a Texas, that you would not have been able to do some of the work that you did.
Well, I think so because, those faculty members at those top name schools, they have a lot of pressure, right? They have they have a lot of students to support and things like that. And, for me, I didn't have that. And like I said, I could try these crazy things and just, what, if it worked, great. And if not, well, we move on to the next thing.
So one stop along the way that I have to ask you about is Las Vegas, and you were there both as a student and as a faculty member, I believe. What surprised you about Las Vegas during your 2 stints there?
So Las Vegas it's a wonderful place, right? I never really got into the whole gambling and all of that kind of stuff. I didn't. Eventually I moved away from being close to Las Vegas Boulevard and things like that. When I went there as a student, right, I moved to Las Vegas in January. And so I left Winnipeg. And the night before I left, it was minus 40 C, right? It was cold. And I'm like, oh, thank goodness, I'm moving to someplace warm, right? And went to Las Vegas. It's nice, and it's warming up, and it's warming up, and it's warming up. And then in March, it was like, wow, it's as hot in March as it is in the summer in Winnipeg. And I'm like, what am I going to do in the summertime? So I learned to drink a lot of water and use a lot of skin lotion to help the dryness.
What do you think the biggest thing that you miss about Vegas is, though? You mentioned before the interview about the nature there.
Oh, yeah. The nature is just wonderful, right? And, okay, I'm a rock nerd, right? I love rocks, and I love geology. And so just to be in a place where geology is right at the surface and you can go explore and things like that, it's wonderful. And I have some of that right here in my own backyard in Boise. So I'm kind of the luckiest guy in the world.
Ended up back in the West after many years out in the humid, swampy region. And we're going to ask you a little bit more about rock here in just a moment. The other question that we ask everybody to start the back half of the interview is how you first got involved in ASCE and GI.
That's a good question. I've got a good story about that too. And GI, I have to say this, GI is a very welcoming organization, right? I guess like we've been talking about, I didn't graduate from a big time school. I never worked at a big time school, but I've been able to have leadership positions within the GI, so I've been very fortunate. My introduction to the GI came from our dear friend, Roman Ritsu. So we were at the, what was it called? The Professors Driven Pile Institute in Logan, Utah. And I was, as a new young faculty member, I'm not the most outgoing guy, kind of introverted. And so Roman and I got to talking, and he's like, so what do you do? And, I mentioned, engineering geology stuff and blah, blah, blah. And he's like, I got a committee you should be on. I'm like, well, okay. and so after that, I showed up at a conference. I can't remember what conference it was, but it was in Orlando. And I hadn't registered for the conference. I just drove from Jacksonville down to Orlando to go to this engineering geology and site characterization committee meeting. And back in the day, it was Gordon Matheson from Schnabel Engineering who was leading that committee. And the committee was so small, we actually had our committee meeting on a couch around the coffee table. and so it was, Roman was there, Anand Pupala was there, who else was there? Paul Main was there, right? And I was very proud of myself. I got to sit beside Paul Main. Don't tell him that. But yeah, I was like, ooh, look at me, hobnobbing with these bigwigs. And so, yeah, after that, it was, I guess if you show up, you get nominated for things. So eventually I became the secretary of the committee, this small committee. So it wasn't much of a workload, and just kind of rose up through the ranks. And so, yeah, I had a great time with engineering, geology, and site characterization. And part of my role in that committee was to try and grow it. And I remember some meetings that we had when Roman and Paul and Dick Gray and Nick Sitar would all show up for our committee meetings. And as committee chair, I could just sit back and relax and have all of these heroes just start talking about things and agreeing to disagree on certain things. It was fabulous.
And so that, after several years, you've spent the last few years as the chair of the Technical Coordination Council, which, of course, is the body that sits over all the technical committees in GI and helps them along their way and supports them. What has been I don't know, maybe your proudest moment as TCC chair? What's been the most fun? That might be a better question.
I think the most fun is how we've worked with the Board of Governors to rethink how we should do special projects and to have less projects, but more meaningful projects. And just being able to see the wonderful things that these committees are actually doing. It's unbelievable that we're able to do this. And so that's probably the thing I'm most proud of.
And for our viewers, if you are sitting there saying projects, where can I find out more about these projects? Later this summer, there will be a call that comes out for all GI technical committees to put forward special projects. There's a review process that happens over the summertime. And starting October 1st in the new fiscal year, our committees are allocated, in many cases, a lot of dollars to do special projects focused on activities that the GI wants to forward or anything that you come up with. So for more information on that, you can head over to geo-institute.org. You can, of course, ask me questions about it. You can ask Nick questions about it. You can ask our technical manager, Christina Scott, questions about it. We will be really happy to help you out. We have 4 more questions left in Director's Cut, and one that I had to put in here for you, and I knew you would have a good story for it, is what's the craziest natural weathering you've observed in rock? And you are not going to take this a rocky way. We may talk about rock, but you've got a better story.
All right. So, okay. I spent many years in Florida, right? Florida, the sinkhole capital of the world. So, and okay, not to burst anyone's bubble, but when we're talking about sinkholes, that's a rock problem. It's not a soil problem. So I've seen tremendous sinkholes from that have occurred after storms and things like that. But my best story about rock weathering didn't even happen outside. This was something that actually happened inside. So I was on a tour in Philadelphia the year before we had Geo-Congress in Philadelphia. And one of the top stops on this tour was a church, an old church that was a community gathering place for in Philadelphia, in central Philadelphia. And so there we entered this church. It's just a beautiful big church. And we were all supposed to listen to the speaker. But I looked over my shoulder, and I'm like, what is going on with that wall? And I guess the church has had some water damage, and the water damaged this beautiful plaster crown molding, but it was only damaged in certain sections. So I had this beautiful transition from unweathered crown molding all the way to completely weathered ground molding. So while everyone was listening to the speaker, there's Nick off to the side. And, I don't sneak around very easily, right? I'm kind of tall. And so people tend to notice me. And so I'm off to the side trying to take pictures so I can make this beautiful like mosaic of this 50 feet of weathering within this church.
So you said that you actually got to use that in a presentation. What did you do more research about it? What did you find?
Well, it kind of played into some of the research that we were doing on trying to quantify weathering, making remote sensing measurements on surfaces of limestone rock, where you look at this weathering, and when you look at it from a macroscopic view, it looks like weathering smooths out all the surfaces, right? If you think about the gargoyles and headstones, I mean, it's a little bit creepy, but they seem to get smoothed out. But if you look at the micro topography, you see that it's actually getting rougher. The higher the weathering, the rougher the surface really is. And so that was the goal of one of our projects, is to try and quantify weathering using micro topography.
That is very cool. We have to go back. I mentioned that we would talk a little bit more about your department at Boise State. And when I came out there a couple summers ago, one of the coolest things that I noticed was some of the other faculty members that are in your building or in your hallway even. You've got a couple of atmospheric scientists in there and geologists around. I mean, what's the biggest advantage to you to the structure of this department? How have you been able to use it to your advantage?
So we have a very unique situation at Boise State. I guess a little backstory. I came from a smaller university, and where I worked, there wasn't even a geoscience program. There was a person in physics who was a paleontologist. So that's the closest we got to a geoscientist. I was the only geotechnical engineer within the civil engineering program. So I had to make some friends pretty quickly from outside. But then coming to Boise State, civil engineering was put into a building with geosciences and the School of Public Service. Wow. And the thought was, here are three technical disciplines that are, often thought of as separate, but two of them deal with the natural environment, right? Civil engineering and geosciences, but two of them also deal with the built environment, right? Infrastructure, civil engineering, and then the School of Public Service, which includes urban studies. And so the thought was, hey, let's put all of these programs together, and maybe this can serve as an incubator. And so that was a great idea. Unfortunately, I haven't had a whole lot of time to explore those options, but hopefully soon I'll get with these colleagues and start something fantastic.
Well, that is great. And anybody who wants to head out to Boise State, I can vouch for the fact that it's a very cool campus, a very cool environment. They have some great labs out there, too, if you're into that. But you have to go see the blue turf. What was the first thing when you started thinking about taking that job? What was the first thing they showed you? Was it the blue turf or was it something else?
No, it wasn't the blue turf. But you know what? Everyone knows about that.
Yeah.
When I came out, it was the typical interview. I had been to Boise once before, and I was very fortunate that in my department, there's two other geotechnical engineers, and I had met Arvin Farid, who is the chair of the Geo-Environmental Committee. I had met him, I think in 2008, when I was out in Boise for a conference. So I've known him a long time. And the other person we have is Bhaskar Chatori, who I met when he was a graduate student a long time ago. So I knew these people. But I guess the biggest thing when I came out to interview wasn't the blue turf. It was there's this statue of this giant bee on campus. in front of the administration building. And so at Boise State, we have a downtown campus and the regular campus that are connected by, university buses. And so I was on a tour to go downtown, and we're driving by this big bee, and I'm like, hey, we got to stop. I need my picture by this big bee. And so ended up, leaning against this bee and took a picture of it just in case I never got to come back. So.
And here you are, and you still have the picture, I'm sure, for posterity.
Of course. It pops up in a presentation every once in a while.
Oh, that's fantastic. We have 2 questions left. It is, of course, in many places, the beginning of spring, although we had a little discussion before, and the weather here at the palatial Keelor Estate in Virginia is belying that today. It's very cold and windy today. But we have to ask, what one thing signals the beginning of spring for you?
So you think about spring, right? You think about, love is in the air, right? The sun just feels that tad bit more warm, right, on the back of your neck. In my neighborhood, daffodils are blooming because they're planted along the boulevards. I'm getting ready to attend Geo-Congress, and I've got my NCAA Final Four picks in. But for me, the beginning of spring is the start of seasonal allergies, right? I love Mother Nature, but for whatever reason, she doesn't have the same feelings for me, unfortunately.
And those things can rage, and the car is covered in pollen and all of that good stuff.
Yes.
Those are tough times. We have to finish with a question about your Canadianness. You've mentioned it a couple times in this interview. You are from Manitoba.
I am.
There are a lot of stereotypes about Canadians. I grew up right on the border. I know many of these stereotypes. Sometimes I have some of them within me. What are the 3 most Canadian things that you do in your day-to-day life, Nick Hudyma?
All right. The first one, I probably say sorry a little bit too often. I take off my shoes when I enter someone's house all the time.
Oh, I didn't think about that one. That's a good one.
I get teased about that a lot. And I guess the last one, I still play hockey. Now, I don't play very well, but I still get out there and try my best.
So you are one person I can talk to about this, and I didn't think about this. When I was a kid, I don't know if your experience was the same. Did you leave shoes at school in winter?
Yes.
And everyone's mind is blown by this. You would wear your boots to school and change when you got there and put your shoes on for the day, and you would leave them there overnight. And I was talking to my wife about this, and she thought it sounded insane. And I was like, well, you had to, because otherwise you wouldn't have any shoes to put on your feet when you got to school. That's yes. Another good question. Did you have a rule about indoor or outdoor recess? Was there a threshold that you had to stay inside?
You know what? Growing up, we didn't have one. And one of my good friends, he still tells the story about how he got a frozen soccer ball actually hit him in the face when he was a kid. When we get together, he still tells that story. So,
and it's painful. I think ours was the wind chill. We did have one. I think the wind chill had to be below 15 below for us to have indoor recess, which now, today here, I think the wind chill is 30 and everybody's freaking out. So that was excellent. We didn't have an extended hockey talk, and I don't know. I feel somewhat remiss in doing that. And I know one thing I wanted to give you a shout out for is when we went to the Flyers game in Philadelphia against the Maple Leafs, no less, at the end of Geo-Congress a couple of years ago. Nick wore his Bobby Clark. You have the orange Flyers sweater, correct?
Oh, of course, the orange Flyers, yes.
And that is fantastic. You made it through all 10 questions. You did it with flying colors. And we're happy to celebrate you. And, it was great that you went through how you got involved with ASCE there. I think for a lot of people, it's pizza as a student member. But it was really cool that your first involvement was really in a technical committee. And I hope that inspires a lot of our viewers to go out and join technical committees as well. You can find the form to do so at geo-institute.org. We can always find a place for you if you would like to get more involved with the society. As I said at the beginning of the interview, you should do a couple of things. You should click subscribe and get notifications. We will let you know every time we post something to the YouTube channel, which is super frequently. So Nick, thank you for doing this.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
And I think we had a good time, and hopefully some burning questions that you may have had about Nick were answered. And for all of our viewers, we will see you with a brand new Director's Cut next week.